Okay, hello and welcome to Beastly Theories. I'm your host, McGrath. Today we've got a very special guest, long-term veteran cryptozoology researcher, star of many TV shows, including the In Search of Monsters show that's on at the moment, and I'm really loving that. It's Ken Gerhard. Ken, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing terrific, Andy. Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to talk to you.
Well, it really is a pleasure. I've read many of your works. Of course, you being a part of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, that's a big UK link. Mm-hmm. I know you've been here to the UK quite a few times as well. Now, for the one or two listeners out there, living in attics and basements who've never heard of you, tell us about the start. Let's just start at the beginning, like everybody does. What clicked with cryptozoology? Why did you choose this financially unfulfilling, thankless job as your life's passion?
Well, it's a great passion if you, completely ignore the financial aspects of it. But man, I don't really know that I chose cryptozoology as a career. In fact, I'm sure I didn't. I think it's just it has been a lifelong passion. I remember I often tell people when I was about 8 years old, I remember seeing a TV show about Bigfoot, and something just clicked. I just thought it was the coolest notion ever, that there might actually be these giant, hairy, man-like creatures running around in the woods of North America and elsewhere. Where I was very fortunate was that my mother was very influential. She was a travel agent and a very adventurous one, and she brought me along on many fabulous vacations around the world. We traveled to the Amazon jungle and Machu Picchu, Galapagos, Australia, Thailand. I mean, she always wanted, I think she seriously wanted me to be an archaeologist, because she would always take me to ruins in Carthage and Greece and elsewhere. But so she was very supportive, and she would tell me stories about the Yeti and the Mothman and some of these other weird creatures that she had heard about. But looking back, Andy, as I get older, I see and I realize that there were many sort of seminal influences that maybe I didn't realize at the time. Like my first movie was a Godzilla movie, and I was always into monsters, and I liked to collect snakes and salamanders out of the yard, and there were all these kind of like subtle things that even maybe before I saw that Bigfoot show that I was still kind of leaning towards, even though I didn't know what it was, mystery and the outdoors and the natural world, and just really the wonders of what could be out there beyond the beyond the tree line that we haven't seen yet, that we haven't discovered. So
yeah, well, I mean, that certainly comes across in your work. It's funny, actually, the movies, in retrospect, you think the movies played a part, because similarly for me, it was the Harryhausen movies, Ray Harryhausen.
Oh yeah, for
Sinbad, and all of these different things. Clash of the Titans actually being the seminal one, because I think that's essentially where his best work was produced, in concordance with the film that was taking place there. That does pique an interest. It does make you wonder, and it's not so popular a notion these days, but boys kind of like monsters. Not only boys, but generally it does seem to be a leaning. And it's amazing to think there could be stuff out there. Now, what interested me a lot about the books that you've written is that you've covered a lot of flying cryptids as well, which a lot of people choose to avoid. I've got your book, Monsters of Texas, actually, the one you did with Nick Redfern, which was, I think, a few years back now, isn't it? But I was also interested in the encounters with flying humanoids, book that you wrote back in 2013. Now, could you tell us about some of the different creatures in that book, because flying humanoids, to me, that doesn't sound like, giant birds or pterosaur-like creatures. We're talking about man-like creatures that are winged, right? Angelic-like creatures, or we're just talking about things like Mothman.
Kind of a variety, but just to kind of, this might be useful for any people that are out there that are interested in maybe becoming researchers. Play the home field advantage. I think that's a strategic thing, and that's kind of where my interest in flying cryptids and winged creatures began, because when I decided to write a book, which is what a leading cryptozoologist recommended I do if I wanted to kind of make a name for myself, I realized that no one had ever really written a book about the big bird, which is a famous cryptid here in Texas, at least famous if you're into cryptids. It's a kind of a winged creature that was reported back in 1976, a little bit in 1975. And it wasn't too terribly far from where I lived, so I figured, that's a good place to kind of get into that. And that, of course, led to research in, kind of the continent-wide, worldwide flying cryptids. And, most of those, the traditional, what we call thunderbirds, which I guess are just, really just big birds, or some people describe big flying reptiles like pterosaurs. But as I said, my mother always kind of piqued my interest in something called the Mothman. Mm-hmm. And it was really just a lucky break. But after I had already gotten involved in investigating the big bird, which does have some weird elements if you delve into the stories, there are sometimes some strange aspects to some of those flying bird reports and others. But I guess about 2009, I was contacted by the producers of the TV show Monster Quest, and they were looking to do an episode on Mothman-type reports that were emanating out of Mexico at that time. And I had already done one episode with them on the big bird in South Texas, and I guess the fact that I was in Texas already, very close to Mexico, and that they associated me with the winged cryptids, so I kind of talked my way into that first flying humanoid program. And that kind of launched my investigations into things like Mothman. I'm sorry I was kind of rambling there, but
no, you wouldn't.
Mothman, of course, is the most iconic of these winged humanoid creatures. And, it's described as having human-like legs, sturdy legs, and standing about 6.5 feet tall, but of course wings and large glowing red eyes. There are similar creatures around the world, such as the Owlman, which you guys have over there in Great Britain. And then you have worldwide stories of other types of flying humanoid creatures, and they kind of run the gamut. So you have a mixture of what we call bird men, which are traditionally like human-like forms with feathered bird wings, kind of angelic, I guess. And then you have things like the Mothman, which seem almost like too weird to be anything, maybe something supernatural or science fiction, if you will. And then you have, of course, different types of gargoyle-like creatures like the Jersey Devil and the Brentford Griffin and some of these kind of fabulous chimeras. And I find a lot of similar aspects in a lot of those mysteries and with a lot of those different types of creatures. And so I feel like, you could include those all in one book, which I did. So,
well, I mean, yeah, the book looks very interesting. Actually, it made my to buy list today. So once I realized that one was out as well, it's it's an interesting subject because we have a few of those mystery flyers of varying description. So you mentioned the Owlman, of course, and I always wondered if that had some relation to Mothman sightings, because there does seem to be some similarity in form. Even if it's not very clear what that might be. And we have a few other mysterious things here, as well as pterosaur sightings and the rest of it. They are very rare. But the US and Texas especially, it does seem to have such I know it's a big state, it's almost country size essentially, but it does seem to have a wealth of different types of cryptids. So come to your book, Monsters of Texas, which I have. I thought there's a mystery, sort of demon dogs. You've got these strange lizard-like creatures. You've got Bigfoot. You've got your own kind of Bigfoot by the sounds of it. As you mentioned, Big Bird, and perhaps even some pterosaur type creatures as well. How do you, that being your state, how do you go and investigate these creatures? Do you meet with the witnesses directly, or do you pick up stories from the press? How do you gather this research and put it together, or even validate that it's accurate and not just fantasy or fiction, for example?
Well, first, as you know, Andy, the field of cryptozoology, of course, has drawn the ire of traditional science for many years. They were kind of viewed as oddballs by the scientific establishment and also a lot of the general population. So I've always felt like we have an obligation to maintain the integrity of the pursuit by, sticking to scientific principles and methodologies when we research. And I think that's what our founding fathers like Heuvelmans and Ivan Sanderson and some of those guys would have wanted, was us to, be objective, think critically, and just really look at the evidence and look at each evidence set as an independent set of data, that you're kind of evaluating on its own merit. Don't jump to conclusions. Try to avoid bias, which is very difficult because you're dealing with rather fabulous subject matter. But, every investigation I do is a little bit different in terms of, how I get involved. For example, I do have people that reach out to me on a regular basis that claim that they've had these extraordinary encounters with all manner of unknown fabulous beasts. And some of them I'm able to eliminate my interest in pursuing rather quickly based on claims that are just, ridiculously outrageous or just incomprehensible. I just don't feel like, and not that I want to judge these people or dissuade people from having their own experiences that they're entitled to. But, just case in point, I just heard from a guy that claims that he saw this group of 10 foot high or higher man-like figures with glowing eyes running through his property. Now, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, would be the first thing that would jump to mind if you said a large, hairy, man-like thing. But 10 feet or taller, that's starting to get a little bit fabulous in terms of, if you look at the accepted research and the foundation of research that we've had for many years. So things like that, or things where people believe they've had multiple experiences with different creatures. I've got Bigfoot and Dogman, and I saw a Thunderbird, and and this, it becomes complicated and messy. So I try to stick to the investigations where someone gives me a very credible, for example, I've never had any interest in cryptozoology or any of this weird stuff, but I did see this thing and I don't know what it is, and this is what it looked like. That's a very convincing kind
the antagonistic witness is the surprise possession in this field. To find somebody that comes to you and says, I don't know what I saw, I've got no interest in this, but somebody told me I've got to tell you, you're the guy I should tell about this. That to me is always a big boon. I'm like, fantastic, thank you. And when they describe what they saw, and they don't say Bigfoot, Nessie, Mothman, whatever, they just say it was like a large chimpanzee standing on two legs, or like an orangutan with a flat face. I love that kind of description. That's always the key in for me. I think it's a wonderful place. My wife actually grew up in Texas, in Arlington.
Oh wow!
She's from the Middle East, but she spent, I think, between 6 and 12 then. She loved it. She liked Texans, always wanted to go back. And so there's, this little sort of that vibe in the house here. What I do like about that area of the US and the people from there actually, and I can relate to that coming from a Celtic country, as I think people, although they are polite, they are direct, they're open, they're honest, at least in their presentation about what they experience in life. And I think that can be very valuable in research. As to the kind of reports that you're taking and these tells that you're looking for, I often do wonder, if you get 1 or 2, 3 fantastical cryptids of different speciation given to you by the same witness, and that this is a very lucky person. That's not to say they're lying, but perhaps perhaps in the course of our research, this isn't going to help it's not going to give us further credibility, to feature somebody that has 3 different sightings in one book. So that's what I say. It's not that I don't believe you, I just can't include it, on this occasion. Thank you for getting in touch. Now, talking about cryptids that are hard to believe in, you've obviously looked at Dogman or Wolfman or whatever people want to call it these days. I had a little chapter in my book was called Dogman Rebranding the Werewolf, and it kind of went into that aspect of it, less embarrassing way to take on this legendary and historical creature in both of our countries. What's your take on that, on the Dogman?
Well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that, I think you're spot on in terms of your representation of Dogman. People always ask me what the difference is between a Dogman and a werewolf, and there's no difference. I mean, were means man, and a wolf and a dog are 2 species that can and do interbreed on a regular basis, so they're basically the same thing. So it is kind of a modern take, if you will. Now, we held a Dogman symposium back in 2016. It was the only event I've ever organized, and I decided to do it because I noticed how immensely popular the Dogman mystery had become in recent years, and I just felt like this would be a good opportunity to bring a lot of people together to talk about it. So we had this first event up in a town called Defiance, Ohio, which actually had a kind of a Dogman incident or incidents back in 1972, so it had a bit of a history. And the speakers were Linda Godfrey, Stan Gordon, Nick Redfern, myself, John Tenney, and David Weatherly, people that had all kind of investigated different aspects of Dogman, werewolf type mysteries. And we gave different presentations. Then we had about 165 people turn out. It was a nice turnout for the first year. But I think where we really maybe made some sense of it, I'd like to think we did, was when we had a kind of an expert panel at the end. Now, suffice it to say, I'm not saying that there really are such things as experts in any of these mysteries or cryptids.
Sure.
So we're professional speculators. That's what we do.
Yeah.
But we got on a panel and we all talked about it, and I think we were all on the same page in feeling that the Dogman mystery definitely bears many just utterly weird and seemingly supernatural components. I mean, Linda talked at length about these weird phantom mists that are often accompanied them. If you look at the behavior, and I tend to lean on traditional zoology, so if you look at the behavior of the animal, I mean, it's completely unnatural. People describe Dogman as chasing their car, attacking their car, chasing them, clawing at their window. Those aren't things that typically a wild animal are prone to do. Animals are typically, even predators, as you know, Andy, are very elusive and shy and retreating animals. They don't want confrontation with humans. We're very scary to them. So I think, what we kind of all agreed on is that the Dogman is some type of supernatural manifestation, not a flesh and blood creature, not any type of unknown animal or prehistoric survival, but some type of manifestation of energy. And whether that manifestation is something that is of an ultra-terrestrial origin, that is, there's some intelligence behind it beyond our understanding that projects this thing into our world, or if it's something that we've created. And I think that was a kind of a popular theory, is that, if you look at the way that a Dogman has really taken off, if you will, in recent years, and now you're getting reports from all over the world, starting in the Midwestern United States, and now there's probably Dogman reports in England, and of Africa, Australia, South America. Yeah. So it's almost like something that we gave life. And so in that respect, this is kind of a cosmic abstract, but like a thought projection, something that lies or in the unconscious levels of our mind, and somehow all of us together kind of projected this thing into our reality by believing it was so. So that's really as far as I've gotten with it, honestly. So I've done a little bit of research, but certainly not to the level of Linda Godfrey and others. And because there are so many excellent people like Linda that are already spending a lot of time and effort and energy on this particular subject, I tend to focus on others a little bit more.
I think that's really a good philosophy. Now, people like, as you say, Nick and Linda and Mr. Weatherly there as well, and they've done a lot of work on that, such as yourself. What I think is interesting about what you said there about the Dogman is this increasing popularity. Like, did we create this phenomena because suddenly, if you've been into cryptozoology for a long time, as you have, and I have, you see the changeover from this Bigfoot popularity to this Dogman popularity rising up. You can even see it with some of the groups kind of switching over to some of the online groups switching over bit by bit into this more of this Dogman research or Dogman encounters type of study. No, I think it's fine. It's worthy. Some people are definitely seeing something, but what I don't think is, and from all of the minimal studies that I did on it, they were present in countries where there were Bigfoot sightings, but there were much fewer there were much fewer sightings on the whole. In all of the countries, both here in the UK and in the US as well, and they seem to be less pervasive throughout the country than things like Bigfoot. And I don't think there's enough sightings to justify the appetite for this creature, that the media appetite, and for the amount of evidence that's being promoted and pushed, online, and that to me is slightly worrying, because I think, where commercial interests or likes or whatever are concerned, there's a need. You have to fulfill a customer need, so to speak, and yet I don't think there's enough product to give them that need, and that leads to spurious reports or just over exaggerations of evidence. Yeah, and that's interesting. I saw that happen with the Bigfoot thing a bit, but it seems to have died back, and suddenly the Dogman is what we're looking at in that sense. I know Mothman is also rising up, but I mean those reports are so sparse. How could you possibly make a genre out of it?
Yeah, could I make one more point, Andy, about the Dogman? Because I may have been overgeneralizing a bit. I was kind of trying to a one-size-fits-all answer. Most cryptids and mystery creatures, I think, are composites. So, in other words, the Dogman, there are most certainly some percentage of the Dogman sightings are fabrications. Some are probably hallucinations. Some are probably misidentifications of known things like bears, maybe some Bigfoot reports mixed in. So I think when looking at any of these topics, you have to consider that there's not really one. There's one answer usually when you're talking about kind of the root of the mystery. Where did the first sightings or accounts or things that's absolutely described, a Dogman type creature. But as the popularity of the mystery grows, obviously there's this social phenomenon where all these other things start getting sucked into the sort of the universe, if you will.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. No, sorry, I've kind of cut you off in the middle of that.
No, that's all I wanted to say is that I think there are some other. Probably there are some people making up stories as well. I mean, we can't disregard that. I'm in no way asserting that people who've had sightings are making those up. Similarly, in the UK to what you're describing there, we've had some supposed Dogman reports where I think the issue is that the creature was down on all fours at some point, but they've actually described a human-like face on a hair-covered creature, which could be a Bigfoot on all fours. Not always, but one or two reports seem to match that, and I think that's the mistaken identity. Also, in places like Australia or in the US especially, maybe escaped kangaroos, that theory, the odd escaped kangaroo could account for this, but then it's still a bit of a stretch, to imagine a big wolf man because you've seen a kangaroo out of its natural habitat. It could happen. But my main concern is, there's a big appetite. Everybody in this genre is hungry for it, what we're going to feed them, that kind of thing. I think that seems to be the case there. Let's talk about the show, In Search of Monsters. I'm really enjoying this. You're obviously getting to go all over. And let's talk about where you've been so far, what your favorite
aspect of the show has been, and how it's going.
Well, I've been really enjoyed being part of the show. First off, the production company, and that's where it all starts. They've been good to work with. I don't travel around quite as much at this point because I'm mainly a commentator. So they'll fly me out to California to do the interviews, but they have sent me on a couple of investigations. They do try to feature an investigation as part of each episode, which I think is cool, that they do have actually people going out and looking for evidence and so forth. So I've been involved in 2 of those. But the production company is Prometheus, who have done a series called Ancient Aliens for many seasons and have had a lot of success with that. So they're, excuse me, they know what they're doing in terms of kind of addressing kind of unexplained phenomenon. And I think that they put a good show together. They provide a lot of information, a lot of background information on each topic, a lot of history. They've relied heavily on myself and Nick Redfern and others, Linda Godfrey and others that maybe had a little bit more experience, so they've been open to new ideas.
Right.
Ultimately, they do tend to, on each episode, spin things off in kind of an outside of the box, if you will. And you know, in many episodes, of course, they've discussed interdimensional and extraterrestrial theories because that's what they're comfortable with. They've been doing that for many, many years, and I don't think they necessarily view all of these cryptids or mystery creatures as fitting into that, but maybe they just want to explore that. So that's really the only criticism I've gotten from maybe some of the hardcore cryptozoology fans that want to keep it all, all down to earth. But I think I think they've done a good job. I'm hoping it's obviously a very popular show. I've gotten good feedback from a number of people that really enjoy it. There's always the small criticisms of this and that. I wish they had talked about this or ignored that.
Yeah.
I will say that when I do my interviews with them, if they ask me a question that I think is a little bit out there or that I'm not comfortable with, they will allow me to take a pass. And I think that's, very gracious of them to not try to paint me into a corner where I'm making a comment on something or perhaps saying something that's out of context or misleading. So
well, that's unusual. I mean, that you've kind of looked at that. That really is considerate, from a media perspective. I've liked what I've seen so far, actually, Ken. And what do I think? What I think is, media has to be interesting. It has to be watchable. So if they're talking about the alien aspect of some of these things, well, some people out there think that's a possibility, or paranormal aspect. Others too. They've got that interest, and I'm obviously not selling this idea to you, but as a cryptozoologist, we know that it's a small community, and those of us who are very serious about it can't simply keep the others in business by buying their books and products. It has to be amenable to the general audience, right?
Sure.
And that definitely does come across in the show, and I think it's doing really, really good work at this point.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate your kind words, and you make some excellent points, and that's what I try to explain to people is, a show like this can't survive solely on the backs of people that are interested in, a specific type of cryptozoology or whatever. You have to reach a broad audience, as you said. They want to catch people that are just flipping through channels or maybe have a passing interest and get sucked in. That's important for ratings. And ratings are ultimately what's required for a network to continue to dish out money to pay for more episodes. Absolutely. And so we're hoping that they do get picked up for a second season. And, hopefully, as you know, Andy, there's so many cool and interesting cryptids and mystery creatures and things that you could explore around the world, so they could keep it going as long as they wanted to.
Oh, I hope so. I hope they do as well. In the last 10 minutes before you go, you've been on a lot of shows. You're a field researcher as well, which not everybody might not be completely aware of that. I'd be interested in knowing about any sort of close encounters you've had, or any periods of time when you thought you may be coming into contact with a cryptid like Bigfoot or something else, and how you felt in the moment. It's always interesting for me to consider that, you may go out looking for Bigfoot, but actually, if you were to come face to face with it, in that moment, do you really want that experience? Because it's an unknown factor. So what's your experience? Have you had anything like that happen to you, and how did you feel at the time?
Well, Andy, of course, people ask me that quite a bit, and I can honestly say I've never seen Bigfoot or any other cryptid or anything else with my own eyes. I do have a couple of encounters, or a few encounters, that involve vocalizations and just things that I heard, but obviously it's subjective because I didn't actually see what was making the sounds. But I'll give you my sort of my most hair-raising encounter occurred during the summer of 2003, and I was at a location called Cottonwood Lake in North Texas, close to the Oklahoma border, about 50 miles due north of Lake Worth, Texas. And if you, as you said, you're married to someone who lived in Arlington, they may know where Lake Worth is. There was a famous Bigfoot flap there in 1969. But anyways, we were at this location. It was kind of a remote little lake in the Caddo grasslands. We had heard that there were sightings of something like a Bigfoot around this lake. Just after dark, we were hiking around the perimeter of the lake. I was with 3 other investigators, and suddenly we heard something grunting at us. And I always describe it as kind of a mixture between like a heavy panting and also like a diabolical laughter. But it was very primate-like. It sounded like an ape. Mm-hmm. And it was very loud and guttural, and I had a recorder, so I still have a recording of the sounds.
Wow.
But this thing we immediately all acknowledged and looked at each other and realized this is not any known animal that any of us had ever encountered. It wasn't a deer and rut. It wasn't a pig. It was like, this sounds like an ape or something, and it's really angry. We couldn't see it because it was obscured by some heavy brush about 40 yards away. Now, one of us was armed. This is Texas, as you know. So you expect everyone to be armed, but on this one occasion, only one of us was armed. And to his credit, he began to crawl on his belly into the brush in an attempt to kind of flush this thing out. Meanwhile, I kind of went to the one side of the brushy area and another guy to another. Our idea was, if we flush this thing out, we'll try to get a picture of it or see it at least. And it was a very nerve-wracking situation because, as you suggested, we didn't know what this thing was. It sounded big. It sounded aggressive. We weren't armed very well. But, this thing it was grunting for a little while, and then the sound just kind of stopped. Now, there were other weird things that happened that night. Since we couldn't see it, we went up on a levee overlooking this little lake, and we shined a spotlight down. And where we had heard this thing, we saw eye shine it was hard to tell, but it looked like it was at least 6 feet off the ground, man height at least, yellow eye shine. We made camp in the area, and I heard through the course of the night several kind of moaning type vocalizations echoing across the lake. And then in the following morning, when we finally were able to, in the daylight, we cut our way into this thick, brushy area, and there was a little beach where we had heard this thing. There were deep footprints, man-sized, larger than man-sized, very deep footprints, and there were turtle shells that had been ripped clean in half from top to bottom. And I always use the analogy kind of like a pistachio nut. When you eat the pistachio, you've just got 2 little halves laying there. So these turtle shells had been torn in half, good-sized turtle shells, several of them. So all of that together was kind of the most convincing thing that I've experienced that night and that morning, that I must have encountered something unknown. I couldn't come up with any other explanation that would encapsulate the sounds, the eye shine, the mutilated animal shells, the footprints, and so forth. So
that's pretty compelling, Ken. Really compelling, and all credit to you for going into the bush, or for your friend to go into the bush and trying to flush it out. What stands out to me there is he was armed and he was flushing it out toward you unarmed folks on the other side.
Yeah, and I had a funny thought there, which was, you know what, this may be the last thing I ever do in my life, but I'll be famous as being the guy that videotaped the Bigfoot that was running toward him before
shortly before
pummeled him to death.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we do, man. You're a cryptozoologist. You have to get the evidence, man. That's what it's all about.
Well, I was telling somebody just the other day about when I was at Lake Champlain last year, and at night on Arnold's Bay, and scoping out for champ, a lot of nighttime sightings, and all I could think about the whole time, and of course we don't have bears here in the UK, and I've got a sort of a phobia, if not a phobia, but I'm afraid of bears, and it's silly because we don't have them, so why be afraid of them? But of course, as I was out there in Vermont, they've got some black bears. All I could think about is every single noise I heard was, is that a black bear? Is this a black bear? Is that a black bear? And, the creatures about in the US are dangerous enough to do you some serious harm. Never mind the 800-pound Sasquatch that may be hiding behind the bush. Talking about this kind of thing, I think it's, it is a really interesting community to belong to. And for people listening, for anybody who's not out there researching, who's just interested in finding out, it's always nice to just go and take a walk, in the woods and the hills and the mountains and see what you can see. I always say, take a friend with you or some sort of GPS or something and let everybody know where you are. But you must have been on lots of expeditions, and I'd be very interested to know. I always ask everybody if you could search for any cryptid in the world, in any locale, any place in the entire world, with two of your favorite researchers, living or dead, where would you go? What would you search for? And who would the two researchers be that you would take with you?
Oh, wow. That's well, I of course, people often ask me about, which expedition I would go on or what my favorite cryptid is. It's always very difficult because, I love them all so much. They're all quite fascinating.
Kind of a bucket list question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the list, I think, many of sort of the hard-edged cryptozoologists have a short list of cryptids that we view as being a little bit more probable or more likely than others. And, we could be completely wrong, but I think, top of the list, you'd look at the thylacine. I think there's mounting evidence that there is a viable breeding population, at least on Tasmania. I don't know if I can speak to the Australian sightings, but, it's possible as well. But I think that is, if you prove any of these things exist, it's going to be a huge boost to the field in general, because then scientists would finally have to take notice and say, okay, well, we were wrong about that. What else? So I would say the thylacine has always been something that I've wanted to investigate, and I've have colleagues that have been there into Tasmania, and I corroborate with witnesses. And then maybe number two would be the orang pendek, of course, probably something to that. And then number three, I'm going to say, and I've been there once, but Lake Iliamna in Alaska, the Lake Iliamna monster fish, I think there's definitely something to that as well. Now, as far as people I'd love to work with, I never had the great honor and pleasure, but Roy Mackle was pretty passionate investigator. I mean, here's a guy that went into the African Congo at least a couple of times and risked his life and limb, and he built a crossbow with a bio dart thing for the Loch Ness Monster, which I think is pretty hardcore. So I think Roy Mackle is definitely somebody I would love to do work with.
Sure.
And maybe a younger Ivan Sanderson. I mean, I know he went into the field a lot younger, but he had a great love of biodiverse jungles and different wilderness habitats around the world. And he seemed like a very interesting and engaging guy. I'm sure either of those guys would have been fun to have worked with. But, I feel very fortunate, Andy. There are a lot of cryptozoologists. As you said, it's a small community, but many of the leading cryptozoologists in the field, I'm greatly honored to consider friends and colleagues. And it's just, that's one of the most enjoyable things about this pursuit is just the people that you get to work with.
I think so. I would readily agree with that. And being... what do I call it? New to career cryptozoology. I call it that with euphemism. But the community has been very open, very inviting, and turning a lifelong boyhood interest into sort of a lifestyle has been remarkably easy because of the people in the community. Actually, I can really vouch for that. I can just before you go. Obviously, you've got the new show out, In Search of Monsters, but where can people find you online? Where can they get your books? What are you promoting, and what's coming up next?
Well, thanks again for having me on, Andy. Very much appreciated. My website is kengerhard.com, kengerhard.com. I also have a Facebook fan page, Ken Gerhard Cryptozoologist. Sadly, I'm not yet on Twitter and Instagram. I'm trying to work towards that. I just don't have enough time. So those are probably the best two places to get in touch with me if someone has a question or would like to discuss something or share an experience with me. I'd definitely love to hear it. As far as what I have coming up, next weekend I'll be in Pennsylvania for the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Camping Adventure. That should be a good time. Western PA, and then I'm going to be at the Legend of Boggy Creek Fouke Monster Festival in Fouke, Arkansas. Awesome. On June 14th, and that's going to be exciting because they're actually relaunching the new digitally enhanced remastered version of the classic Bigfoot thriller, The Legend of Boggy Creek, and we'll also be doing a conference there as well. So that's what I have on the docket at the moment.
I'm green with envy. That sounds absolutely awesome. Ken, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Andy. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.